Hello. Today I want to talk about removal spells in black, and I want to focus on a specific type of removal, but it's worth noting that black can remove cards with all kinds of card types. I'm only going to look at instants and sorceries for the bulk of the video, and the reason for that is just to show that even if we narrow our lens and limit ourselves to just instants and sorceries in one color that remove cards, or that remove creatures specifically, there's still a ton of options. Now, of course, this is something that black is very good at this. If I changed the color to green, our options would go down. But I do kind of have this monstrosity of a search here. So some cards that maybe you would expect to see are omitted because my filter, unintentionally gets rid of them. But the goal isn't to talk about every single card ever that can remove creatures, but just to kind of highlight the different flavors they come in, and how you might want to make choices based on your cube. Or if you're building a cube, you could even start with these types of cards and see which ones stand out to you and which ones interest you, and then maybe you can start from there. Every cube has a jumping off point, so I've always thought black removal spells are pretty rich in terms of their options. So another thing to note is this is sorted by cube count, which is useful, but there's no catch-all metric that's perfect. Of course, cube count favors older cards that are in more cubes, so someone might see that a card's popular and they'll run it too just because it's popular, even if maybe there's a better choice for their environment. And on the other side of the spectrum, newer cards that maybe are exciting, if you're not paying attention, you won't know it exists. One more thing is commander cubes are getting more popular, so if you have a traditional cube or if you have a commander cube, you just got to be aware that the waters are kind of muddied a little bit, since this doesn't differentiate what type of cube it's in. Maybe someday in the future they'll add that, or maybe it already exists and I'm unaware of it, but I don't think so. But anyway, let's dive into some specific examples here. So these are just the more efficient ones. They cost 1 or 2 mana, or in the case of Snuff Out or Delve, they have ways to be cost for nothing or for cheaper than their printed value. So let's look at like Go for the Throat and Doomblade and all these ones that say destroy target non-something creature. These come in so many different flavors. There's also Cast Down, destroy a non-legendary. Here's Ultimate Price, destroy target monocolored. So I guess this doesn't technically say non-something, but it's monocolored. There's also Shot the Sheriff somewhere down the list here. Destroy target non-outlaw creature, and then it lists what's considered an outlaw. So you could kind of gear the flavor of your cube towards these. Here's Power Word Kill, destroy target non-angel, demon, devil, dragon. So even this one little subclass has lots of different paths that you can go down based on maybe the power level that you want or the flavor that you want. Some just get rid of any creature. Bone Shards gets rid of anything, even a Planeswalker for 1 mana, although it's got a downside, but we'll get to that in a second. Infernal Grasp, any creature at instant speed, but you lose a couple of life. Here's Damn. It's it can be removal, or you can overload it to make it a sweeper. And there's just so many to choose from. So let's get back to Bone Shards real quick. So this one you could either discard a card or sacrifice a creature. But for 1 mana, it gets rid of a creature or a planeswalker. It is at sorcery speed, so that's something to consider. And a very similar card is Bitter Triumph. It's 2 mana and it's instant, but it has a similar restriction where you have to discard a card, or in this case, pay 3 life. But it also gets rid of a creature or a planeswalker. So I would, investigate all these types of options and see which ones are right for you. Here's the ones that I'm running, and we'll see that, like I said, these are just instants and sorcerers, but there's pretty much every card type in black can remove a spell, or remove something. And not just by destroying it, there's also Dismember here. Maybe this technically isn't a black card, since it could be cast without any black mana, but it gives the creature -5/-5. That's a very, well-known card. Down here is Grim Bauble. That's an artifact that also shrinks a creature. It's only at -2/-2, but it is 1 mana, and it has other utility. So we saw these three on the previous page. Here's Liliana, another classic that can make you sacrifice. So that's another big way to get rid of creatures in black, is make your opponent sacrifice them. Now, of course, that means they get to choose which they sacrifice, generally speaking. Accursed Marauder makes them sack a non-token, so that's maybe a little better than making them sack, anything, which could just be a little token. Noxious Gearhulk enters the battlefield and destroys a creature. That's pretty common. There's lots of other ones that do that, and lots that do it for less mana. I'm just running this one because it hits different archetypes, but I'm not really here to delve into the specific options I'm choosing. It's just to highlight that removal comes in other forms than saying destroy or exile. It can also shrink or make them sacrifice. And it also comes, pretty much any card type that exists in Magic can be turned into a removal spell, in black at least. And here on Scryfall, just a quick, really simple search. It's black, it's tagged as a removal spell, and it's not a sweeper. And there's 983 options for you to choose from. Now, some of these you maybe wouldn't consider them removal spells necessarily. I mean, here's Bowmasters. That's not necessarily removing something on demand. And here's Grave Pact. So you could pare it down a little bit, but there's just so many to choose from. And obviously you can go your own route with that. For example, you could look at just the ones that have this Marauder type effect. So this is Accursed Marauder, and all the other cards like it, where when it comes into play, it makes everyone sacrifice a creature. Now, there's actually only 12 of these, which is pretty small, but if you wanted to make it a theme in your cube, there's enough for you to choose from. Here's kind of a messy search, but the point is these are ones that you have to discard a card or sacrifice something. And I like these because they have lots of play with Reanimator, or maybe you have a bunch of ways to make tokens in black, and sacrificing a creature is not really much of a downside. So you've got, Bone Shards here is pretty well known. I also wanted to zero in on Bone Shards and another card that basically no one plays. So these cards are kind of similar, and they have strengths and weaknesses compared to each other, but Bone Shards is a card that is very popular and lots of people run. We kind of talked about it already, but there's what it does if you want to read it. And then over here we have Worthy Cost, which basically no one plays. Now, it is newer, so it's not on as many people's radar, but the main difference here is this exiles a creature or planeswalker rather than destroy it, so it's better than Bone Shards in that regard. But as a downside, the only additional cost is that you have to sacrifice a creature. You don't have the option to discard a card, which obviously makes it less useful in something like Reanimator. But this could be right for you. It is, 1 mana, and it gets rid of any creature or planeswalker, and it not only destroys them, it exiles them, so it gets around indestructible, gets around any kind of dice triggers they might have. It doesn't let them reanimate it later. So I just think it's interesting that these cards are somewhat similar, and this one even has upsides over Bone Shards, but Bone Shards is a card that basically everyone knows, or at least most people know, and Worthy Cost is a card that no one knows. So it can be worth your time to kind of dig deep on some of these searches and find what works for you. You don't have to just sort by the most popular and look at the top couple options and move on. I mean, for example, even this search here I did at 138, and I didn't even go into page 2. So yeah, hopefully you found this useful. Let me know if there's any removal spells in black that I didn't even mention that you like, or maybe some I talked about as being good that you think are pretty overrated. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.